الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول حي على الصلاة حي على حي على الفلاح حي على الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله تعالى فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك وله الحمد وهو على كل شيء قدير. All praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as He is worthy of being praised. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the infinite blessings that He's bestowed upon us, the blessings He's given us that you and I are able to recognize He's given us, and the infinite blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us that we take for granted or that we don't even think about. From our safety to our health, to our wealth, to our prosperity, to us being able to come to a masjid to worship Him on this blessed day of Jummah, while masajid are being desecrated and damaged across the world, while people don't have the health or the ability or the safety to go and pray on this blessed day, we are invited to one of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's houses. This is a blessing please do not take for granted. Thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this blessing and do something with this blessing. Whomsoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides to the straight path, There's none that can misguide such a soul. And we seek help. We seek guidance in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep us and make us from amongst these people. And whomsoever is misguided, there is none that can guide such a soul. And we seek refuge in the evil of ourselves, from the evil of ourselves, and from the evil of shaitan. And we seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from being from amongst them. I bear witness that there is no God worthy of worship but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that the Rasul alayhi salatu wassalam is the last, the final, and most elect of his messengers. Says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu taqu Allah haqqa tuqatih, wa la tamutunna illa wa antum muslimun. O you people of faith, be conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, be reverent of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, have awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a manner which is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Have Allah in your hearts as He is worthy of being in your hearts. Allah should not be an afterthought. Allah should be the first thought that comes into our mind in the morning. It should govern the way we interact in the workplace. It should govern our friendships. It should govern our professional relationships. It should govern the way we treat our mothers and fathers and our siblings and our brothers and sisters and children. And it should govern how we behave when we eat and when we sleep and when we get ready for the next day, our career decisions. Have Allah in your hearts when it comes to all of those matters. And do not die and do not leave this earth except in a state of Islam, except in a state of submission, except in a state of surrender to that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked and made obligatory upon us, and in staying away from the matters that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has deemed prohibited for our own benefit. For you and I cannot choose when we depart this world, but we can choose how we depart this world. Our lives may end today. They may end next week. They may end years from now. That's not the point. The point is, what have you and I done in the time leading up to the departure of our souls? What have you and I done to mend our relationships with mother and father, with our kids, with our spouses? What have we done so that when we depart, we have no debts in terms of our relationships? We have no financial debts if that's in our control. We have not hurt anyone, and if we have hurt somebody, we sincerely sought repentance in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to mend those relationships to the best of our abilities. Life is short, potentially. If you have the ability to go to Hajj, go. Life is short. If you haven't mended a relationship, mend it now. Life is short. What are you waiting on to talk to your brother that you haven't talked to in years? Or your sister or your parent? What are we waiting for? We don't know when our time is up. Please meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the best condition that you can. Brothers and sisters, in these few moments, I wanted to reflect on some of the moments in the seerah that have a lot of parallels to what we are seeing around us. You see, around the 7th year of the Hijrah, there was a very difficult moment in the Prophet ﷺ's life, and that was before the death of Sayyidah Khadija, before the death of Abu Talib, before Ta'if, before all of that, was an episode of about 2 to 3 years called the boycott. When the Muslims, the fledgling Muslim community in Mecca were boycotted. And what led to this boycott? Because if you study the da'wah, you see the da'wah went through its stages. And the Rasul ﷺ started with a private call to his family, his immediate household, his closest friends, that by reputation alone they would accept Islam. And in came the likes of his wife, of course, Khadija radiallahu anha, and Ali, and Sayyidina Abu Bakr, and Zayd, Ridwanullah alayhim. And this message appealed to those who were downtrodden, of course, those who were viewed as less in society from a socioeconomic standpoint. And so it appealed to the likes of Sayyidina Bilal, Sayyidina Ammar, and Yasir, and Sayyida Sumayya, radiallahu anhu. It appealed to all of them. And it didn't make much shockwaves in the community. Because of course, just like the people said to Sayyidina Nuh, we only see the lowlifes in the community. The people who no one cares about are the ones following your message. This is what the disbelievers would say. But then came وَأَنذِرْ عَشِيرَتَكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ. And then came the part of the da'wah where the Rasul ﷺ was commanded to tell his family and his tribe about the message. And so there's the famous incident where he hosts a dinner with his immediate tribe, and he has Sayyidina Ali helping him. And at that dinner, the first night, before the call to the message comes, Abu Lahab removes himself from the gathering. And so they do the gathering again, and the Rasul ﷺ invites them to the call of Islam. They know his reputation, they know who he is. And Abu Lahab says, perhaps the mildest thing he says in opposition to the Rasul ﷺ, he says, what you have come with is different than what we have. We have our ways of our forefathers, and we're not going to give that up for what you're preaching. Take a second to think about this, by the way. This is a prophet of Allah telling people to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is someone who is directly being spoken to through Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam. And the arrogance of humanity can blind them from a messenger. Why? Because this is what our forefathers did. So please, parents, and please, young children who are not yet married and inshallah have aspirations for marriage and having children, be careful what we teach our children. Because wallahi, it is very difficult. It is very difficult, for better and for worse, to undo a knot of tarbiyah, good or bad, that you've taught your child. If you have taught your child to pray from a young age, it is difficult to pull that away from them. And if you have taught your child to bow to something other than Allah, whether physically in terms of worship or metaphorically in terms of what you're inclined to in this life, it is very difficult to pull that away from them. If they see you more passionate about the soccer game than you are about salah, that is something that will stick with your children and be very difficult to pull away from them. Our forefathers were on this path. We're not going to change what our forefathers came with. This is what Abu Lahab said to a messenger of God. So think about you and I, who are trying to call people to Islam, when we don't get the message or the response that we would hope for. If a messenger of God was not immune from this rejection, who are you and I? And let us renew our intentions, and may Allah guide us completely, all of us. Now, then comes the part where he has to relay the message publicly. And that is when the episode of Tabbat Yada Abi Lahabin wa Tab comes. And this is when the opposition becomes public, because the message becomes public. And this opposition starts with things that are verbal. And it comes to a fever where they go to Abu Talib and says, hand over your nephew. What he's doing is too much. Disruptive stuff. You mean to tell us that this person can come now and say worship one God? You mean to tell us this person can come and say inna akramakum indallahi atqakum? That the best amongst you is the person who has the most taqwa in his hearts? Because that means that this slave in society can be better in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than me. That means that my son, who is helping me in my oppression, can now go help the slave. Because the slave, you're saying, could potentially be better than me. And it will pull son away from father. That means to tell me that that lower class member of society can now elevate themselves and free themselves from that oppression by relying on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and following this new message. Very disruptive. You see, the Rasul ﷺ would not have met opposition if he stayed with the status quo. If he went about his salawat and did not interact with society and try to address the harms in society, nobody would have cared. But this was a direct threat to the hegemony of Quraysh. This was a direct threat to how Quraysh went about their daily business. This was a direct threat to the elite, that you could no longer go ahead with your oppression and be unchecked. And there was a movement going in Quraysh, in Mecca, that had the theme and the goal of purifying that land as it had been at the time of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. So this was incredibly disruptive. And people might look at the time in Mecca and think that this was a time of weakness. But why would Quraysh have responded with such venom in their words and in their actions? Why would they have tortured Bilal radiallahu anhu? Why would they have killed Sumayya radiallahu anha? Why would they have tortured Ammar and Yasir? Why would they have tortured them if they were weak? They might have been physically weak in the forms of not having weaponry, or not being able to fight, or not being commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to defend themselves. But there was something so powerful in their hearts that the Quraysh wanted to stamp it out. For when they went to Abu Talib and said, hand over your nephew, Abu Talib did not want confrontation. He went to his nephew, the Rasul ﷺ, and said, can you stop what you're doing? It's causing X, Y, and Z in the community. And the Rasul ﷺ said the famous quote, if you gave me the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left, meaning if you gave me everything that the world had to offer in terms of money, wealth, whatever it may be that people would want from the material world, I would not and I cannot stop what I am doing unless I am overtaken by death. There is nothing that will stop me from preaching this message. And so Abu Talib says, despite not being a Muslim, go and continue your message. You have my protection and I will never get in your way. You see, there's an important message in this as well, because people may not be upon our faith, but when you stand with courage and dignity for your deen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will put respect in the people's hearts, whether or not they are Muslim. Maybe not everybody, because the Abu Jahls and the Abu Lahabs still existed at this time. But He will create for you allies who do not share the same faith tradition as you, because you stand firm on something that everyone with a shred of sincerity in their heart will respect. And that is, you have dignity, you have honor. When it's time to pray, you pray. It doesn't matter if you are at the mall, it doesn't matter if you are at work, it doesn't matter where you are. And people will respect that. Yes, there will be people who say, why is this person prostrating in the middle of work? Why is this person absent from these social gatherings for this reason or that reason? But that's not what you're doing it for. You're doing it for Allah sincerely. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will put respect in people's hearts. And just as there will be some person who criticizes you for doing that, wallahi, there will be a non-Muslim who will defend your honor in your absence. There will be a non-Muslim who will defend your honor in your absence. And I know people in this room have stories of that happening in their lives. So be proud of that. You see, all of this led to certain things. And of course, what continued to happen when they were persecuted, next came the migration to Abyssinia. Very terrible PR. Very terrible for Mecca to see a significant part of its population, the young fledgling Muslim community, a good part of it going to Abyssinia. Why? Because we cannot worship safely or freely here in Mecca. You welcome everyone with open arms from the Arabian Peninsula. It doesn't matter who they worship, but your own family, they have to go somewhere else to worship safely. And of course, they tried everything they could to bring them back, and they failed due to the sincerity and uprightness of a Najashi. And so this again looked terrible for them. And then perhaps the final blow before the boycott was the entering of Islam of two legends, Sayyidina Hamza and Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. Because now it wasn't just the people who us elites in our material sense look down upon who embraced Islam. It was the strongest from amongst us now. It was the people who had status in our society and were envied for their physical prowess and the power in their voice. And people were intimidated by how powerful they are. That after those two entered Islam, radiallahu anhu, that people prayed publicly then. And it's narrated that they prayed in front of the Kaaba that time. And it turned at the hearts of the Quraysh. And we must do something to stop this, because Islam has now not only penetrated the low members of society, it has penetrated the powerful hearts in society. We have to stop this. And so then comes the boycott.
None of us are allowed to marry from them. None of us are allowed to socialize with them. None of us are allowed to interact with them in any sense, and we are not allowed to buy or sell from them. In other words, they have to leave. In some narrations, they were forced to leave their homes. In some narrations, they voluntarily went to the valley. Shib Abi Talib. No food or water. How dare the Palestinians demand food and water? How dare the Palestinians demand to go back to the lands that they were kicked off of? How dare the Palestinians demand dignity? How dare the Algerians demand freedom from the French? How dare those in the Indian subcontinent desire freedom from the British? They won't accept our subjugation. They won't accept our hegemony. They won't accept our oppression. Then we will beat this Islam out of them. Because if we cannot get the Rasul ﷺ to stop preaching the message, then we will starve his people. And we will let him hear the babies of the Muslims crying. And maybe that will make him stop. Maybe that will turn the Muslims against him. Maybe that will make the Muslims say, Ya Rasulullah, this is too much. We can't handle this. And you know what? It's okay to be shaken. Because Allah tells us that it's the believers who said, Mata Nasrullah. It's the believers who said, when will the victory of Allah come? مَسَّتْهُمُ الْبَأْسَاءُ وَالضَّرَّاءُ وَزُلْزِلُوا. That all forms of hardship shook them to their core. To the point that they asked the one who is receiving revelation, when will the help and victory from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala come? أَلَا إِنَّ نَصْرَ اللَّهِ قَرِيبٌ. The nasr, the victory, and the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there. And know that they are doing that because your oppressors are the ones who realize they are losing and they are trying to stamp it out of you. And they know, and they are realizing that their weapons, their control over the natural resources, no matter what they destroy, no matter how many millions they spend, it is not taking something out of your hearts which is more valuable than all of that, and that is your iman. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم من كل ذنب فاستغفروه تجدوه غفورا رحيما. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. What I've described in the first half of the khutbah is captured by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when He says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ لِيَصُدُّوا عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. That the people who have disbelieved, the people who cover the truth from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they will spend their wealth to divert people from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَسَيُنْفِقُونَهَا ثُمَّ تَكُونُ حَسْرَةً عَلَيْهِمْ. And they will continue to spend their wealth until it is a source of regret for them. Perhaps in this life, because they realized they could not extinguish the flame of Islam, and then many of those people who spent their wealth at the time of the Rasul ﷺ eventually see the Prophet come into Mecca with Fatih Mecca, and they embrace Islam and realize, what a fool I was. And you hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mercy on people and shows them that. Or maybe it's the powers that be who are spending their millions to build settlements on Palestine, in Palestine, on the land that was taken away from the Palestinians. And they're realizing we're spending these billions to let people come from here and go populate land stolen by people. And it's really making us look terrible. to the point of regret. And you hope that people recognize that in this life. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide people in this life. But if they do not feel that regret now, they will absolutely feel that regret before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because that is the ultimate day of regret or the day of rejoice for people. So they will spend that wealth until it is a source of regret for them. ثُمَّ يُغْلَبُونَ. Then they will be defeated. وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا إِلَى جَهَنَّمْ يُحْشَرُونَ. And the people who deny the truth and the people who disbelieve in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have an eternal abode in the fire of hell, wal-'iyadu billah. And for those who say, who want to look at words and say, Allah is saying that the oppressors will be defeated, this is calling for an end to this is calling for an end to that. No, we are calling for an end to oppression, very clearly. Just as Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anh walks into Al-Quds and liberates it from oppression, just like Sayyidina Salah ad-Din walks into Al-Quds and liberates it from oppression, to the resounding positive reviews from the Western world that has historically been at odds with the Muslims and jumps at the first opportunity to criticize them. They have nothing but positive things to say about these figures. And that is a land that can only be liberated with hearts that have reverence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It has happened before and it will happen again. It may seem like we don't have the upper hand, but wallahi, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted victory to those not because of the power they had in terms of money or resources, but because of what was in their hearts. And we see what is in the people's hearts is coming out and guiding the vast majority of people, even though that may not be what the media conglomerates are putting out there, but it is winning the hearts. It is winning the hearts. It has done it before. It is Allah's promise. Stay strong in your faith, for victory has been, will be, and will always be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad, كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم اغفر للمسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات إنك سميع قريب مجيب الدعوات. وأقم الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله